Welcome to the Freight Project Podcast, brought to you by Ceresys, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project Podcast episode, I welcome Chuck Intrieri, a longtime contributor to the Ceresys blog. As with any first-time guest, you'll get to know Chuck's background in the logistics industry, primarily focused on providing expertise on the lean supply chain. On the episode, Chuck and I will have a great discussion around why, if supply chain executives want to achieve their desired outcomes in omnichannel, customer experience, final mile, collaboration, and more, they should take a look at some of the fundamental applications of lean supply chain strategies. On the episode, Chuck will answer the following questions. What are lean supply chain strategies according to Chuck's applied experience? What are some of the first areas of focus that a pro should look at to start lean supply chain strategies application? What are some of the initial hurdles to change that you've seen faced by the staff when management or leadership starts to deploy these lean supply chain strategies? And once these initiatives are put in place and adopted, what are some of the benefits that a company will see? And we'll discuss blockchain, AI, visibility, and automation, and how these technologies come into play in the lean supply chain. We'll then talk about the voice of the customer and why it's vital in lean supply chain strategies and what to focus on when it comes to voice of the customer. And then finally, Chuck will answer what is one piece of advice he'd give the generation that is now coming up and running the supply chain. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast.
Hello, Chuck, and thanks so much for being on as a valued subject matter expert on the Freight Project Podcast. Now, before I ask you to tell us a bit about who you are and your experience in the supply chain, I want our listeners to know something about Chuck. Chuck was and still is a great mentor to me as I began my career in the supply chain and logistics world about 7 years ago, coming on as the marketing manager here at Ceresys. I first ventured out, to start the Ceresys blog and our content marketing efforts. And as I did my research out there, Chuck's content and his presence on LinkedIn really stood out. He was always trying to educate the marketplace and, engage ideas around that. And his ideas and his ability to inform an audience continue to be an influence to me 7 years later. And I'm happy to call Chuck a dear friend. And first and foremost, Chuck, thanks so much for helping me get started in this industry and inspiring me today. So I just wanted everybody to know that Chuck in the supply chain world is who I call a legend. He's been around and seen a few things, but he's also stayed up with the times. So I'm really honored, and it's really special for me to have you on as a guest today, Chuck.
You are a great friend as well. I started in supply chain and logistics with the Schwinn Bicycle Company in Chicago, Illinois, as you know. Most bicycle parts were not made in the USA at this time. We had suppliers in Europe and Japan. I worked with freight forwarders, steamship companies, custom brokers, transportation to bring the necessary bicycle components to the Schwinn assembly line via New York or the Great Lakes when they weren't frozen. I also visited these suppliers in Europe and Japan twice a year. Schwinn worked in collaboration with its suppliers. I'm a big believer in collaboration, as you know. I also worked at Troy Built. They made rototillers in upstate New York as a director of materials management. Based on my experiences with these and other companies, I started Charles M. Intrieri Consulting.
So you've really been up on the idea of collaboration since before it was such an important initiative for supply chain executives, doing it at Schwinn,
yes.
Working internationally and really focusing on those vendor relationships. And as you know, the greatest mantra today in the supply chain, even just in my 7 years, I've seen it move from a tactical conversation to one that involves strategy. And it all goes down to, yes, technology is important, but I think what we're seeing with the rise of technology is this focus on people and relationships. And you've really stressed that throughout your career. And I think, that experience of working with suppliers and really teaching, whether it be a 3PL, a shipper, a technology provider, that fundamentals still matter. And so that experience really positions us well for the discussion today, given that vast experience where you provided these, what you call lean supply chain strategies, not only at Schwinn, but also in that consulting practice that you mentioned, Charles in Treary Consulting. So let's center on the subject of the lean supply chain then. Before we get into some tips and maybe some best practices about the lean supply chain and collaboration, can you define what a lean supply chain means to you?
Thank you. Yes, a lean supply chain eliminates all waste in the supply chain and increases throughput to bring value to the customer beyond their expectations. The lean supply chain is in place to bring value to the customer, to be customer-centric, to meet customer needs as quickly as possible with good quality and eliminating all waste.
Well, you're, again, I think, a man before your time, right? You've been trying to scream the phrase customer experience probably since your days at Schwinn. And what is the biggest buzzword that you hear around today that even the CEOs are saying, and they're starting to ask the supply chain folks, hey, can we talk a little more less about cost reduction? I still want you to do that, but there's this word I've been hearing called customer experience. And the supply chain professional goes, well, finally, you're hearing what I'm finally trying to tell you. So it's great to see that those, in the C-suite aren't just looking at the supply chain as a cost center anymore, but as a way to truly not just root out inefficiencies and cost, but as a way to develop that customer-centric supply chain that's really vital in a world that continues to be disrupted, whether it be by Amazon or, some really effective retailers that are changing, the direct-to-consumer game, like those pure-play online mattress companies that you've seen come up over the last few years. So thanks for kind of really defining that idea of lean supply chain. I think it's really important that our audience understands where you're coming from in the next few answers to my questions. So when you're talking to a company about lean supply chain and they kind of understand what you mean, just as you've defined it, what are some of the first areas of focus that a supply chain professional should look at? There are so many various supply chain disciplines, and it may be confusing to know where to start. So where do you tell them to start, Chuck?
Top management knows that lean can add value, but many haven't moved past the initial education stage into a full-scale lean supply chain implementation. I've got to say this isn't easy. It takes time, it takes teamwork, it takes collaboration. It's really a culture change because lean is a new way of doing business, as you know. It's not the normal business way, it's a lean way. And you got to help implement the supply chain as a system of interconnected and independent partners that collaborate and operate in unison to accomplish supply chain objectives. This is not an easy task or project, but it should be done to eliminate all the waste. And also there should be metrics involved in this project to monitor these objectives to ensure success across the supply chain. As you know, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we have to be able to measure and improve our program of a lean supply chain together. But it's a massive project because all of the interconnected and interdependent partners that collaborate and operate in unison to create the supply chain. But it can be done if everybody works together. Again, that word collaboration is so important.
Yeah, and not even, just between the suppliers, just like you tried to and did successfully at Schwinn as you worked with those international suppliers, shortening some of those, communication times and getting on the same page with more effective collaboration. That's also true interdepartmentally within your own company, as you stated here. And it can't just be, silos of departments trying to achieve a company-wide project without getting the right people in play. So it's all about getting your team ready. And I think on a recent podcast we have, when we specifically talked about just transportation management system adoption and getting that on board, that was what, our onboarding manager, who has done this herself for 20 years, onboarding technology systems in the supply chain. It really takes stating what are our goals, who are the players, What expectations and roles do they have? What are our timelines? And then I think that last key point you made, what are the things we're going to measure to ensure that all of this is actually successful? So it is a paradigm shift. It is a new way of thinking. And you've got to really level set, not take any of that for granted. And it could feel fundamentally rudimentary. It could feel a little bit 101. But I think when we start with step 1, we're more confident with step 2. And you can't really get to step 10 unless you take that first step together. So those are some important first considerations, Chuck. And now that the supply chain pros know those things, where to start, and if they've started some of the initial applications of those areas to make their supply chain lean, what are some of the challenges, the hurdles to change that you've seen faced by the staff when management or leadership starts to deploy these lean supply chain initiatives?
Well, the culture change is always difficult. It's people have to change the way they're doing business. Lean is a different way of running a company, so they all have to understand lean and what it's about. All wastes have to be eliminated in their department and outside the supply chain, and they have to look in some departments like procurement, they have to avoid duplicate procedures in different departments. Manufacturing has to improve quality, and precision prevents defects and return goods. Warehousing has to keep inventory levels as low as possible and reasonable. These are all culture changes for procurement, manufacturing, warehouses. And your specialty is transportation at Cerasis. So you have to consolidate multiple products into a single shipment. You have to use your transportation management system to optimize freight. There's a lot involved here to get rid of all the waste in the supply chain. The system complexity, additional unnecessary steps and confusing processes have to be eliminated in systems. There's so many systems involved, interdepartmentally, ERP, EDI, all these systems have to be simplified and made easy. Lead times have to be minimized, and excessive wait times have to be minimized. Transport is one of your areas, Adams. Unnecessary movement of products, not consolidating products, not using TMS, transportation management system. Space, holding places for unnecessary inventory. Inventory, people, they call it inventory, but I call it money. To me, inventory is money, and we should start looking at inventory as money in space, in reduction. Maybe that would have people look at it differently. Inventory, raw, work in process, and finished goods is money. It's not just what we call these things, in my opinion.
That's a good way to look at it. I got to tell you, Chuck, I don't know, and I'll have to send you this article, but they did this great article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about how those companies, if you're chasing Amazon, you may be looking at the wrong thing. And what they said is, yeah, Amazon's great, but if you look at your own inventory and the reason that there's been a 10-year bull run, whereas it was an accepted business school mantra in the 80s, that every bull run ended after 4 years because no company could effectively manage and do just-in-time inventory well enough that eventually they'd have too much inventory and it would cause a recession because it would be too much product with not enough demand. And they've said that the reason we keep having longer bull runs is not because of some magical, government policy or anything like that, or whoever's president. It's because we're getting really, really good at inventory management. And so I think you're right. And that can, let me continue. I'll let you continue. What are some other things, when the main wasters are eliminated, what can it translate to beyond inventory?
Well, you got to look at your packaging, containers that transport air or allow damage. You have to look at energy, eliminate wasteful energy, minimize electricity, gas, utilities. Look at all the things that are energy efficient. Companies are beginning to use solar energy, as you well know. Solar is becoming very important and a focus in industry.
Well, you're now out there in California, so I think you all are leading the charge on solar energy, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Still a lot of work to go. It's a big old state you guys have there. It's almost a country in and of itself. But those are some interesting areas and places of challenge, right? That are all wrought with various wastes. That if you can get rid of those waste, you're going to start to see some improvements. And it's important to know, before going into a lean supply chain, what are some areas that you might be able to eliminate some waste from. And as supply chain pros, they change their mindset and they adopt kind of this waste reduction mentality, all with the goal of increased collaboration and improved customer experience. Let me ask you this. Once they're put in place, what are some other benefits and strategic initiatives that a company will see once they start to see some adoption by the company of this lean supply chain initiative?
Well, you can get increased customer fill rate and customer satisfaction. I think it's all about customer satisfaction, value to the customer. I know we're repeating that over and over, but there's nothing more important than the customer. You know that in your transportation business at Cerasis. The customer is what it's all about, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And I think we find the word delivered is that optimal phrase, right? Delivering a good experience, delivering it on time, delivering it damage-free, delivering upon that set expectation, making sure that the carrier has good freight so that the shipper is delivering upon that shipper of choice promise or status that a carrier wants to see. And at the same time, the shipper has great carrier partners and they're choosing the best ones because they're using metrics to talk about the data they're seeing collaboratively with carriers so that those carriers deliver upon what the shipper wants to see. And at the end of the day, for us as the 3PL or any supply chain professionals, we need to deliver upon, that value we provide in rooting out waste as much as possible so that the transport side is as effective. So it is super important. And I think delivering upon that service, whatever entity you are in the logistics pie, is pretty key.
Yes, it is. It's all about the customer and being customer-centric, as you well know in your business. And then you have to sustain all this, and it has to be continuously improved. You can't just sit back and say, well, I'm done. It has to be sustained and continuously improved as a team. You have to meet with your teammates, see how it's going. There's nothing wrong with having face-to-face meetings once in a while with your supply chain partners, looking how you're doing on metrics, at least quarterly, looking at inventory velocity, inventory reduction. Are you meeting your goals and objectives? Is your supplier performance increasing? Is it better and better? How is the ranking going? What can you do to improve it? And it's a matter of a team, not one person or another. The entire team, the entire supply chain. That's what makes it difficult. You're not talking about one area or another. You're talking about the entire supply chain and departments in the company working together. But it can be done if proper focus is put from top management down and the culture is being changed. Quality improvement using Lean Six Sigma. Lean Six Sigma is a great quality tool. 0.004 rejects per 1,000, and it improves quality, almost zero defects, which is a goal for everybody with their customers. The better the quality is, the more customer satisfaction. And again, the word collaboration comes up last because I'm a big believer in it.
Yeah, and I think it's okay for us to. And I think we'll see it more and more, and it's good for the industry to continue to bang the drum of customer-centric and collaboration. Those two things done well can really transform your supply chain and root out a lot of wastes pretty naturally, because then you can kind of play this devil's advocate, if you will, and say, in that collaborative sense at the C-suite table with all the right players on the team, you can challenge each other a little bit better, a little more effectively, because you've set up that culture of collaboration to say and ask, okay, this sounds great. We're chasing X, Y, and Z. As an example, today's quest for the latest and greatest technology, right? Somebody says, let's go for blockchain. Let's use artificial intelligence to increase visibility, and we've got to be automated because it's just being, pushed down, to the supply chain day in and day out in publications, by consultants, by competitors, by their peers, et cetera, right? And so, but we have to have that collaborative environment in order to say, is it customer centric? And do we have an environment that, honors my ability to ask this tough question, that how does blockchain do that? So how do these, technologies come into play in that lean supply chain methodology? Can maybe too much technology or chasing the trend instead of maybe the, customer centric mindset, could it be a distraction away from those sound fundamentals? What do you think, Chuck?
Well, I like the KISS method, keeping it simple and stupid and keeping it basic. Although technology is important today, we have to remember that, as you indicated and as we've talked about, people make the supply chain effective, not technology. Yeah, sure, technology helps, but people manage these various tools. Chasing too much technology can take focus away from objectives, collaboration, being customer-centric, and the metrics in the supply chain. So we have to be careful. A lean supply chain visibility is critical. Yes, blockchain, AI, RFID, IoT, all these very, very nice and useful technologies will help visibility, but not all at once. I believe in one step at a time and keeping it simple. Simple is better because people will understand that. They'll build a foundation and then grow with all these other special tools one at a time. When they decide to meet and move forward, they use blockchain, AI, RFID, or IoT. And it changes every day. There's always, it seems to be, a new technology daily. So we have to be careful, let that not be a blizzard, and take a look at the basics first, and that's people.
That's right. And I think I kind of want to, summarize a lot of what we've been talking about here today. We've hit really some key things here, right? And I first want to address that customer-centric mindset. And, I was saying, if you have a collaborative environment, right, then you can build a culture built on trust where people will honor your truth. And I think the voice of the customer is the ultimate truth. And so in that environment, voice of the customer is what I was referencing when someone asked the question, but will blockchain make it more customer centric? And if so, how? That you have to challenge that. So can you tell us, what is that voice of the customer mean to you, and why is it important in today's supply chain?
Because you're being customer centric, you want to listen to what the customer has to say. They give you negatives, they give you positives, they give you input that you didn't think about, perhaps, with questions going out to them on a quarterly or monthly basis. And these questions are answered by your customers, and then you take it into consideration as a group and use it to improve. They might say that the deliveries aren't as good as they should be. Quality can be improved here or there, or things you didn't know about. Communication could be improved. The voice of the customer techniques means sending questions out to customers, either with your website or with the special questionnaires that go out, and then on a quarterly basis come back and the customers tell you how you're doing, and they grade you. And from that information, be it quality, quantity, price, place, time, you can then improve your operation as part of the continuous improvement program.
Hey, that sounds pretty fantastic. And I think anybody who's not in the pursuit of continuous improvement, whether it be in their personal lives or in their professional lives, is perhaps selling their potential short. And that things may seem hard, they may seem complex, but as you said, with technology adoption and implementation, one step at a time, right? And how does that happen? Well, I think I'm going to guess what you'll say, but what would be that one piece of advice as the industry continues to transform at light speed, creating a lot of chaos and a lot of disruption? Given your vast wisdom and experience, what would be the one piece of advice that you'd give this generation that is now coming up and running the supply chain?
My piece of advice would be careful of all this technology, because They should be looking at people. People make all this happen, and that's how I feel. People in collaboration. Sure, the technology is important, but it really gets in the way of looking at people. I don't see too many articles about people and what they do in the business. I see plenty of articles in AI, IoT, blockchain, but I don't see much. I have never seen a video or anything that has to do with people and how they fit into the supply chain. Because without them, there's no supply chain, in my opinion.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'll tell you what, in marketing and sales, where my discipline lies, and I think I'm an okay supply chain pro at this point, getting better every day, continuous improvement. I always say people love to buy, right? But they hate to be sold. And in this world, more and more people make decisions and buy things based on people, not how shiny you are, not how, cool buzzword you use or whatever. People really value people today. I think in a world where privacy is dead, there's a lot of stories about your data being hacked. I think we'll continue to see that those companies and those supply chains that can make the customer feel that they're dealing with a reputable company who's really looking out for them and putting everything that the supply chain is built on geared towards making the customer have a great experience where they feel they can speak up to the company and the company will hear them and that they'll respond. Those are the supply chains that make all the difference in the world. And you don't have to chase Amazon. You just have to ask your customers what they need and develop your supply chain around that. Wouldn't you say that's right, Chuck?
I agree with you completely, yes.
Well, I love that. I think that's really key. And Chuck, I can't thank you enough for your wisdom here today. Felt like it was some really key things that will stand the test of time. And I hope some supply chain professionals can take a few things away about collaboration, the voice of the customer, but as well as the benefits of the lean supply chain. So, Chuck, is there a place folks can go for them to learn more about Charles M. Intrieri Consulting or yourself?
The leansupplychain.com or my email if they'd like to email me.
Okay, great. And on this published page for this podcast, I'll make sure to leave a link to that and how you can email Chuck. Chuck, thanks again for your friendship for the last 7 years, your wisdom here today. For all of our listeners of the Freight Project podcast, we thank you for tuning in, and we put all this information out for you. So we appreciate any comments you might have. And for Chuck, have a great day, and our listeners will see you on the next one. Take care.